for inviting me to this incredible meeting. I'm amazed to see how many people there are here. I tried to work out when I last attended one of these symposiums, and I regret to tell you, I think it was 30 years ago, so I've been a little bit out of the loop. So a lot of you most probably won't know who the hell I am. But I was lucky enough to start working on aliens 38 years ago. And in fact, the first alien species I bumped into was when I was the management botanist for the Northern Cape region for Cape Nature Conservation. And I was meant to be finding protected areas in that region for them. Instead of which I just saw mesquite coming up everywhere. And so my very first publication was a thing called Mesquite, a bomb just about to explode. And unfortunately in those days we hadn't even invented the concept of EDRR, and nobody listened, and of course the bomb did explode, and now we've got a multi-million rand problem on our hands. I then went to work in Shishui Game Reserve as the botanist in 1978, and I was meant to do a vegetation monitoring scheme for them, but I regret to say all I could see was a weed which in those years was called Eupatorium odoratum. And I suddenly realized that you didn't do something about this weed, which we decided to call triffid weed, and we invented a Zulu name for it because there was no Zulu name for it then, and we called it Sandaneswa. And basically I decided that it didn't make any difference that I was meant to be doing indigenous plant monitoring. If we didn't get on top of this Eupatorium odoratum, which has subsequently been called Chromalina odorata, there would be no indigenous vegetation to monitor. But that started my career on aliens, and I've been working on and off on aliens ever since. Now, if you've ever taken the time to read any of the abstracts, and I know very few of you will have done so, because I haven't read many of the abstracts myself, you will notice that I thought I was going to do a comprehensive account on post-border control. Well, at that stage I hadn't seen the program, I didn't know what all of you else were going to be proclaiming, I didn't know how long I had, and all I know is that my abstract would have taken me at least 2 hours to deliver that paper. So I've now got a much reduced program, and it's basically to just talk about prioritization in invasive alien plant management, and I've come up with the concept of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it's basically to simply look at those characteristics which I think give you the best chance of predicting your possibilities of success in eradicating a species when it has first arrived, or of containing it once it's already fairly well established. And I emphasize it's within the borders of the area of interest. Post-border control, you can be talking about the province of KZN, you can be talking about Kruger National Park. It's all about the area that you're concerned about. That's post-border control. Some people who say you cannot eradicate a species within any area don't know how many species we've eradicated successfully from our protected areas. We have. We've done an enormous amount of good eradication work inside protected areas. The biggest element of trying to predict which species you ought to be working on once they've got inside your border is this whole business about the threat that they pose. And I'm not going to have the time to cover that, but there's been a wonderful new paper published, and I see that we have Dave Richardson and John Wilson as authors of this very good paper, and I've only read a portion of it, but it's an excellent account, and that's all I'm going to say about threat. So now let's just look at this business about controllability. And these are some of the key factors that I think you have to look at in terms of controllability. So now that's, in my opinion, are the 6 most important elements to consider when you're considering the controllability of an invasive plant. When it's just entered your area and you still have a chance of eradicating it, I think the single most important factor is the dispersal power of the species. If it's already well established, then I think the key factor is the difficulty by controlling it. So let's now look at what is a good invasive alien plant. Now wait a moment. Okay. All right, let's look at a good invasive alien plant. Its seed bank or property or longevity should be short. i.e. you've got a good chance of snuffing it out in a few years. The dispersal power should be low. The time to reach dispersal age should be long, preferably something sort of in the order of 5 years or something. It should be easy to kill the plants once you've spotted them. It should be easy to spot the plants. That's key. If you can't spot the plants, you can eradicate them. The classic biocontrol potential should be easy. Now, the concept of dispersal power is absolutely key if we're going to try and eradicate something. So let's investigate what I think dispersal power is all about. If it's a good alien plant, it should have no long-distance dispersal vectors. It should have few, or it should only have a single vector. It should maybe only be wind dispersed, or only water dispersed, or only bird dispersed. Then you can plan accordingly. It should produce few propagules or seeds. The time to start producing those propagules after your first pioneer has arrived at a site should be long. And the propagule itself shouldn't be able to persist a long time if it fails to germinate. Now, I've been lucky enough over the last couple of years to mentor some of the KZN coordinators. And one of them is that pin-up girl on the Ceticius poster outside the door there, and that's Reshni Lala, who's hiding her face there. And she introduced me to this new alien plant in KZN called Triplaris americana. And these are just two pictures I took last week, the ones at Mount Edgeman along the road and the others at Melito along the road. So even if you don't know the species, let me tell you, it is invading. And you can see why the curator of the Durban Botanic Gardens scooped this up in South America and brought it here, because it's a very pretty tree. But unfortunately, it's spreading. So now, I think this is my example of a good IAP for you. The seed bank longevity, short. Dispersal power is low. It seems to just have these simaroos which are only dispersed a short distance by wind. Time to reach dispersal age is long. Usually measured at least 4 years before they start flowering. Difficulty of killing a plant is easy. Difficulty of spotting a plant is easy. Classic biocontrol, apparently easy, not too sure about that. So it's got all these factors. Not quite sure about the biocontrol potential, but likely to be irrelevant because we don't think we're going to have to wait for it to become an established alien and try and biocontrol it. So the dispersal power of Triplaris, no long-distance dispersal vectors, only a single vector, few propagules relatively, long period, and the propagules we don't think have got staying power. We're not too sure about that. So the management recommendation, it's only got currently a small range in KZN, around Durban and Pietermaritzburg, where it's been introduced in the gardens. Small numbers. It's being dispersed by gardeners in short distances by wind. How can it be controlled? Easily by cutting. What cost to control it? I would just thumbsuck about 100,000 rands. If we did a real blitz now, we could probably kill it all with 100,000 rand. So, yes, yes, yes. But unfortunately, law enforcement is required. People are not prepared to cut out a beautiful flowering female tree from their garden unless they're forced to do it. So, the management conclusion, immediate eradication, and hopefully Reshni's work is going to pay off, and you're going to see this being one of the first species that's been eradicated from South Africa in toto. Now let's look at the characteristics of a bad invasive alien plant. Longevity long, dispersal power high, time to reach the dispersal age short, difficulty of killing a plant difficult, difficulty of killing a plant difficult, low. So look at the dispersal power. Long distance dispersal vectors present, several vectors. Lots of propagules per plant. A year or two for a bad alien before it starts producing propagules, and propagules should have staying power. Here's my first example of a bad alien. Mother of millions, Bryophyllum delegens. Poisonous to people and humans, but I'm not talking about the threat. But this is a species that is creeping up all over South Africa. Everybody's looking the other way. It is a serious bad alien. I live in a little game reserve on the top of the Lubombo Mountains in KwaZulu-Natal, and I moved there 8 years ago. And I have been absolutely dedicated to to getting rid of the species from my little sort of 30 meter by 30 meter garden. And after 8 years, I still haven't done it, even though I've bribed every single individual that I've So, let's look at its properties. The seed bank propagule longevity is long. I know that because for 8 years, I haven't been able to get it out of my garden. It just keeps on coming up. There's just one little plant popping up and spreading. The dispersal power is high, and that's because it just, every little leaf that breaks off it has got bulbs on the end of it, and that grows a new plant. It's a terrible thing. Time to reach dispersal age, very short. As soon as it's put up a few leaves, each of those leaves becomes a dispersal propagule. I've never allowed it to flower in my garden for 8 years, and I still can't get rid of it. Difficulty for killing a plant, very difficult. I've discussed that with Arne Vitz, who did this PhD, I think, on this species. It's damn difficult to kill. Difficult is spotting a plant, damn difficult. It hides amongst the grass, you just can't find it. And apparently its classic biocontrol potential very low because many of the other Crassulacea are eaten by its enemies. There we go. It's a classic bad invasive alien plant. Let's look at its dispersal power. Long distance dispersal vectors, well, maybe you could say it's present because unfortunately when people pull it up and they put it into the back of their buckies and things and they carry it, these little fragments of the plants that fall off the bucky end up growing new plants. So actually the people who are trying to control it very often end up spreading it. So it has got a long distance dispersal vector. It's got several vectors. We're not 100% sure what spreads the seeds, but it's certainly spread by water, and it's spread by all sorts of things. Just break off portions of the plant and spread them around. It's got many propagules per plant area. It produces a propagule which can spread just as soon as it starts growing, and the propagules definitely have staying power, and I've observed that in my own garden. I just know you can't get rid of this thing easily. But it doesn't really have a long distance dispersal vector like wind, and we're not 100% sure whether this business of it being spread by gardeners constitutes a long distance dispersal vector. And it doesn't really have the several vectors, that's correct. It doesn't really have several vectors. The main way it is spread in Southern Africa, and I checked this with Anna, is by surface water flow. That's the thing that is mainly spreading it away from the garden plant. So it actually has got no on those two categories. So the management recommendation for mother of millions, it's scattered all over RSA. It's in gardens everywhere. It's in moderate numbers. It's spreading all over the place. I've seen it spreading in a huge number of South Africa's protected areas. It's being dispersed gardeners in short distances by water. Very difficult to control it. I would estimate if we were to just make a blitz and try and control it in one fell swoop, it must probably cost us about 100 million to try and get rid of it. And can we afford these costs? No. So the conclusion, I think it should be banned in gardens and nurseries, and immediate eradication in all reserves. You're not going to control it outside the reserves, let me tell you. Not a hope in Hades. Here's another bad alien. I'm only going to give you 2 bad aliens. And I'm glad to see that just after I finish talking, there's going to be a wonderful presentation on Barbados spread. And these are all pictures given to me by my friend Carl Vernon, who works on the species in his spare time in East London. And it's spread by these fruits which are dispersed. But much worse than that. Every fragment of the plant that falls to the ground and lies in the soil is capable of sending up a shoot and putting down a root. So it is an absolutely horrendous species to try and control. It has these awful, what are called echinates thorns all along its stem. To get into the thickets and handle it is just horrendous. And it is just the most ghastly alien. So I'm sorry to have shown this. I didn't know when I did my talk that you were going to be talking about Barbados directly afterwards. And it completely swamps the indigenous plant. And when you finish controlling it, that's what you're left with. And I remember the first person who told me about how to control Barbados gooseberry was Mike Bruton, working up at Lake Samai. And he said to me, the only way to control it here is to cut down the whole forest and burn the forest. He says there's just no other way of getting those lianes out the canopy, and every portion of the liane that you leave behind lives. And Carl Vernon, my friend, cut a truncheon of Barbados gooseberry and he hung it underneath his veranda. And for 2 years, that truncheon lived. And if you put it in the ground, it would have just sprouted again without any water. So let's look at its bad characteristics. Yes, propagule longevity long, dispersal power high, maybe because of birds. As soon as it's grown a leaf, apparently if you drop a leaf on the ground, it's allegedly able to sprout from the leaf. I've never seen that, but I've been told that's true. So it's got all these characteristics. And apparently it doesn't have the one characteristic of a really bad invasive alien plant, is that you can't classify and control it. And we're going to be hearing directly after me that that's absolutely so. That you can actually fire control it. So, yes, maybe in terms of long distance dispersal vectors, birds. Several vectors, not really. I think it's just the birds. Lots of propagules, because every leaf, every stem is a propagule. Time to produce propagules, even shorter than a year or two. Does the propagule have staying power? Yes. And it's got these long distance dispersal vehicles, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to have several vectors. So I said the only two things that stop Barbados gooseberry being classed as an ugly IAP is that it does not have multiple long distance dispersal vectors, and it is apparently a good biocontrol candidate, which is what we're going to hear about now. So the management recommendation I would come out with for Barbados gooseberry, it's scattered all over Orange. It's in moderate numbers, so maybe that's a good thing. Grave tender is apparently a big factor of how it's spread in northern Zululand. So ban cultivation, fire control, and immediate eradication or reserves. That would be my recommendation for a bad alien plant. This interesting one about grave tenders, because I remember listening to a presentation by Mike Brock years ago on pom-pom weed, and they suddenly found that one of the main things that was causing it to be spread was people picking the bunches of flowers off the road and putting it on people's graves. And I've seen exactly the same thing happening with famine weed as well. So people, and in Reunion where I worked on the aliens, these shrines that they put up there, they are major foci for alien invasions. So there's a sort of a religious component to how we're spreading aliens. Now let's look at an ugly invasive alien plant. Sorry. Longevity has to be long. The dispersal power has to be very high. The time to reach dispersal has to be very short. It's got to be very difficult to kill the plant. Ideally, it should be very difficult to even spot the plant. And it should have no biocontrol potential. That would be the ultimate ugly alien plant. What would its dispersal power be? It would have long distance dispersal vectors. It would have many vectors, so you never know which way it's going to start spreading in your area of interest. It should have very many propagules produced per plant would be that area. It should start producing its propagules in much less than a year. And the propagule has to have staying power, either as a soil bank that persists or as propagules like the stems of Barbados gooseberry that live for years. And this is my only example of an ugly IAP I'm going to talk about today, and that's Carthenium. That's just for those of you, I didn't know you were going to see I didn't know you were going to see so many pictures of famine weed before my talk, so I thought I'd just show some of you carpenters what famine weed looks like, and it's not a pretty sight. And is it an invasive alien plant? The longevity of the propagule, huge. They say once you've had a plant, and I've seen it on Kubieni, when I arrived there in 2006, we had a plant that had established, and it took us 7 years to eventually kill the little patch that it generated. The dispersal power, very high. Time to reach dispersal age, very short. They say it can start seeding after about a month. Difficulty of killing a plant? Well, You can kill it with herbicides and things, but you have a great deal of difficulty handling it because it's so poisonous and allergenic that all your staff have to wear masks and things like that. It's an absolute nightmare in terms of the logistics of control. Difficulty of spotting your plant? Very difficult? No. Famine weed I can spot from a moving vehicle at about 120 kilometers an hour at about 100 meters actually. So that it doesn't fulfill that characteristic of being difficult to spot. And the classic fire control potential, no, it's not impossible to control it. I do notice from a presentation we had at a famine weed workshop that Lorraine organized a couple of months ago in France Club, that even after they've been biocontrolling for about 20 years in Australia, they have found that they can't reduce the seed bank in the soil below 5,000 seeds per square meter. And that's after the best of treatments, I recall. Lorraine can possibly set me right. So the biocontrol agents are all there, but I just have a horrible sneaking feeling that this species' dispersal power is so strong that even with our very best efforts, we might still find that we have on our hand an incredibly invasive alien. I'm not sure. I hope I'm wrong. And my goodness, do I back control for this family? So let's look at the dispersal power. Long distance dispersal vectors, yes. Spreading like wildfire. Plants popping up all over the place, way away from the original source areas. Many vectors, absolutely. Number of propagules per plant area, enormous. Tens of thousands of seeds produced per plant per year. Much less than a year. Does a newly arrived propagule have the same power? Absolutely. So let's just talk about dispersal vectors. Myrmecocori, spread by ants, just a few meters, not a huge problem. Ornithocori, just hundreds of meters, not too problematic. Anemocori, spread by wind. Now we're talking kilometers. I've seen that with Cromalina or Trifid, as I like to call it. But much, much worse than any of these is a concept that we invented during the Fynbos Bio Alien Plant Workshop back in 1984. Bakikikori. Tens of kilometers. And now that I've started looking at famine weed, we've got the worst of all. Truckocori. And these trucks are spreading famine weed the length and breadth of Africa. And that's not only trucks, it's buses and taxis, and they move huge distances. And that is why famine weed is so very, very difficult to contain. Hundreds of kilometers. Let's have a look at a management recommendation for this post-border control of famine weed, what I call the ugliest in IAP. Large range in South Africa already. Amazing to see how fast the species has occurred. You know, I did a survey of all the protected areas in South Africa in the mid-80s. There wasn't a single mention of famine weed in those areas. How abundant is it? Huge numbers. How is it being dispersed? It's spread by vehicles, water, animals, and man. It's allegedly spread by wind. I mean, they call it Demoina weed because they say it arrived after Cyclone Demoina from Mozambique. But I don't know. Maybe cyclonic winds can move it, but then cyclonic winds can move anything, to be quite honest. But I don't think really wind is a huge factor. Thank goodness. If famine weed was spread by wind, I tell you, we would be in crisis situation. So these are how it can be controlled. Early detection and rapid response, of course, local, very frequent spraying. Cost to control it, I would say 100 million a year. I saw that Michael last year said it was something like 10 million rounds a year. But maybe I just always exaggerate by a factor of 10. So, you can't, all of these are no factors. It's not feasible to prevent. We've looked at the possibility of spraying vehicles and things like that. It's just not feasible to prevent it. And thank goodness for biocontrol. Thanks. So my conclusion then is containment and biocontrol plus eradication and priority reserve. And that's the last section of my talk. and then we're talking about the feasibility of eradication in priority reserves. Now, I was lucky enough to be funded by Isabella KZN Online to do a survey of famine weed in 9 of their protected areas. Okay, so we carried out these surveys for Isabella in March 2013, and they were just rapid roadside surveys, and Jan Lee and I actually carried out the survey inside the park. We produced a little report in May, and these are the main results of that survey. If you look at the yellow columns, that is the percentage of 100-meter long road segments which we tried to assess a distance of 200 meters off the road, so that we could see anything with our 10 times binoculars or however we can do it. And inside the reserve, we had sort of, at our worst, the highest percentage occurrence within the reserve was in Dumu on the Mozambique border, about 32%. And then Pongola was the next most infected, and you saw by the time we got to Itala, it was a tiny little station. In fact, we only found 3 spots in Itala with any famine weed at all. And in both the Ubomba Mountain Reserve and Shatakula Forest, none at all. But outside the reserve, look at the percentage occurrences in those transit sections outside. That is absolutely enormous. We're talking over 90% of the segments were infested outside the reserves, both in Dumu and in Kuzi. Inside the reserves, we estimated each time we saw them what percentage of the area was actually infested by famine weed. And less than 1% was the dominant cover inside the Dumu Game Reserve, which is this white green column on the left-hand side. The 2 reserves that had showed the highest extent of severe infestation, which were the 70 to 100% infested, were in Dumu and Pongola. Pongola was actually the worst infested. And it's no coincidence, because Pongola is bisected by a road that comes from Swaziland. And Swaziland is completely covered in famine. If we look outside the reserves, you'll see that the percentage coverage was much higher in some of these areas. Like, for example, I'll show you the Kuzi data. 70 to 100% cover was estimated for over 50% of the site segments in the subsistence areas outside the Kuzi Game Reserve. Whereas it was over 22% for 37% cover. That is a very serious infestation by invasive plant. In fact, I haven't seen that severity of invasion of anything other than a few of the early stands of cactus in the campus. The thing that gives me encouragement and makes me think that we can actually eradicate it in some of our protected areas is that outside in Kuzi Game Reserve, we surveyed 3 different land use categories. We surveyed the subsistence area, which is characterized by very heavy overgrazing, a lot of land degradation, very poor management. And there was also a private game reserve. And Michael gave the game away yesterday when he spoke about Pinda, and it's Pinda that we're talking about here. And the amazing thing is that Pinda had absolutely 0 famine weed when we surveyed it. 0% cover over 100% of the segments in it. An absolutely amazing contrast to what was in the adjacent subsistence farm area. So that's given me encouragement that with good felt management, and by the way, that's key. Famine weed is an alien invasion that just basically thrives if you damage the indigenous grass cover. And an effective EDR program, you can beat famine weed. So although I believe that famine weed is probably the ugliest alien plant in the world, it is just a plant. And we must remember that plants are no match for us. But people sometimes just want to give up with these really ugly aliens. It is going to cost a lot to control famine weed. It's what I believe to be the ugliest of all our ugly IAPs. But the cost of not controlling are going to be much, much higher. Thank you.